The glass doors held a perfect red bullseye that watched me watch it. Under the cold LED lot lights, the Target logo wasn't branding. It was an eye. Heat still bled out of the asphalt, mixing with the coolant breath of the rooftop HVAC. A shopping cart rattled somewhere in the two empty rows. Ryan killed his engine beside me and grinned like we were clocking in for a prank, not a paycheck. "It's 3 months," he said, slinging his backpack. "We stack boxes, we buy used textbooks. Easy." "Easy," I echoed and lied to my stomach, which had already started its small, tight roll. It does when I smell disinfectant. Inside was brighter than outdoors. The light wasn't warm. It was white in a way that erased color. Red shirts went bloodless. My eyes watered. Guest services glowed ahead. Plexiglass sneeze guards, a little bell, a countertop with a taped square that used to say, "Please stand here." Marcia stood behind it, silver hair pinned back, face like a person who had tried to sleep inside a hurricane. "You the overnight." Not asked, stated. Her name tag was crooked. She straightened it without touching it. "Ethan and Ryan," Ryan said, all ease. "We're here to smash corporate goals." Marcia's mouth moved like it wanted to be a smile, and had forgotten how. She slid a thin white badge across to me. As I clipped it, she leaned forward just enough that the plexi caught her breath and fogged. "Don't ignore him," she said. Quiet, like reading off a receipt, even if it sounds like a joke. "Who?" I asked before I could stop myself. Her eyes shifted to the bullseye on my shirt, the tiniest exhale. "You'll know his voice." She tapped the counter twice, lightly, ritual, and pointed us to the employee corridor. The back hallway smelled like burnt coffee, lemon cleaner, and cardboard dust. Every footstep had a hard tile echo with a half-second delay, as if someone kept walking after we stopped. The break room was rectangles, tables, chairs, a TV hung silent, a green exit sign bleeding color into the corner. Carter stepped out of the office and the room got smaller. Not because he was big, he wasn't, but because he carried himself like a locked door. "Team." He didn't bother asking our names. They were already on a clipboard. "I won't keep you long." He set laminated cards on the table one by one, like dealing a slow-motion hand of bad news. Protocols, 7 of them, not suggestions. I watched the others as much as him. Victor, electronics lead by the lanyard and the weary competence, nodded once like he'd been nodding for years. Deborah picked at a cuticle until it bled, then tucked the hand under the table, eyes shiny like she'd remembered a face at home. Kyle had the skinny, vibrating look of a kid who's always cold. Maya looked 20 on paper and 50 in her stare. Arturo, the janitor, muttered something about "double time better be real," and then grinned to himself like the punchline had teeth. Carter read, "Rule 1, lights out at 2:30 a.m. Freeze in your assigned aisle for 15 minutes. Do not move. Do not speak. Do not look at anything that moves. Rule 2, intercom silence from midnight to 5. If your name is called, do not answer. If it calls 3 times, hum happy birthday until it stops. Rule 3, aisle 13, pet supplies, off limits after 11, no stocking, no cleaning, no exceptions. Rule 4, reflection rule, no staring into security monitors, freezer glass, self-checkout screens when alone. If you see something wrong, look away and count to 30. Rule 5, cleanup calls. If the PA calls a cleanup and there's no spill, don't check. Report false call on channel 7. Continue your task. Rule 6, guests after hours. If someone enters after 2, wearing all black or all white, do not engage. Channel 7, phrase, special assistance needed. Rule 7, backroom door stays closed. If you find it open, shut it without looking in. If it won't shut, evacuate and call management. Questions? He asked like he didn't want one. Ryan lifted a shoulder. Is there going to be a test? Every night is the test. Carter's gaze moved across us and stopped on me for a beat longer than I liked. They exist for your safety. Break them at your own peril. It should have sounded stupid. It didn't. The fluorescent hum had a low harmonic I hadn't heard before. A note that made the fillings in my teeth feel too big. Past the break room window, the sales floor stretched bright and endless, aisles marching to a horizon that didn't exist. The laminated plastic stuck to my fingers like skin in winter. Somewhere overhead, the store clock chirped a clean digital tick. 11 p.m. I looked at the bullseye printed on the far wall. For a second, I could have sworn it blinked. The cart's wheels squealed, a single lonely rirt, and no one was touching it. Victor walked me to electronics with the tired patience of a paramedic showing a newbie where the gauze lives. Phones and cases here, he said, tapping pegs. Cables there, TVs always need facing. Don't fight the TV wall, it wins. His breath smelled like cheap coffee and peppermint. He handed me a box cutter. Keep it sharp. A dull blade is dangerous. I thought sharp blades were dangerous, I said. He half smiled. Dull ones make you force it. Overhead, demonstration loops ran, smiling people buying lamps, a perfect family pushing a perfect red cart past a perfect red sign. Expect more. Pay less. Watching them too long made my eyes ache, like my brain had to do math to resolve how clean everything looked. Kyle drifted up, hugging a roll of shelf labels to his chest. You think Carter means any of that? He asked me, voice low, eyes always on the floor and never on my face, like eye contact might count as breaking a rule. Or is it like a hazing thing? I don't know, I said. I knew I wanted it to be hazing. Hazing meant older kids would say gotcha and hand you a donut. Hazing didn't usually talk through ceilings. Ryan leaned a hip against the end cap and waggled his brows. If it is hazing, they've got budget. We getting paid extra for ghost insurance? He snatched a case and flipped it in his hand. Hey, after shift we're not eating cafe sushi, right? Lesson learned. No one eats sushi from Target except me and your dumb loyalty, and look what it did to your bathroom last semester. I scowled. The memory was a needle. Shut up. See? He grinned. Comedy. We'll be fine. Pet supplies ran parallel to electronics. From our aisle you could see across to the big pet supplies placard and the line of kibble bags like sandbags waiting for a flood. The lights above aisle 13 looked normal until you stared. Then you noticed the color temperature was off by a degree. A brightness that wasn't bright, a dimness that wasn't dark. The air over there had thickness, like looking through warm water. A single red cart rolled across the cross aisle by itself. No one pushed it. It came out of seasonal, front wheel clacking where the rubber had shaved off. It swerved without touching anything and settled nose first at the mouth of aisle 13. Its wheels spun. Slowly, stopped. I waited for someone to laugh. No one did. Victor's jaw tightened. He didn't look at the cart. He looked at my shoulder, just off my face. Not our aisle, he said very calm. We're electronics. You don't think, Ryan started. I think you stock your section, Victor said, and for a second the calm cracked. After 11, you don't look down there. He walked away like he was rehearsing how to walk. Kyle swallowed. I gotta check end caps. He went the opposite direction of aisle 13 and moved too fast for a person trying to look casual. The store had 1,000 noises you stop hearing when there are customers. Tiny pops from cooling duct work, the compressor in the freezer row kicking on, wheels somewhere, always wheels. But with the place empty, every sound had a shadow. The cart's squeal hung around longer than it should have. A rurt that wasn't echo so much as remembering itself. Dude, Ryan said. Softer now. Did you hear anyone call your name earlier? No, I said, and then a small part of me folded in on itself, because I had the sudden certainty that I just lied, and I didn't know to who. We stalked in a kind of fragile truce with the air. I faced a row of blister packs. My fingertips went slick with that new plastic powder, my nose filled with Tide from 2 aisles over, and the ad loop on the TV wall glitched for 1 frame into snow and back so fast I wasn't sure it happened. 11:57 p.m. blinked on a wall clock in the pharmacy sightline. The seconds rolled toward a number that felt like a ledge. Somewhere, a cart bumped something and the sound popped like a knuckle. Ryan rolled his shoulders. Midnight. Place gets officially spooky. Placebo effect. Science. He was still smiling when the PA chime blooped, a single friendly note that made the hair on my arms try to leave. Ethan, the ceiling said. Once. Like a joke. Like a finger-tapping glass. The store liked to talk. Usually it talked about deals. Tonight it knew my name. Ethan, the PA said again. Same voice. Same flat, helpful tone they used to ask someone to pick up a spill. Only there was a flutter under it. A synthetic vibrato like an MP3 warped by heat. I put the box of phone cases down because my hands had gone stupid. Ryan's grin was gone. He glanced at the nearest speaker like it might sprout teeth. Across electronics, a television ran an ad of a smiling barista smiling too long. Rule 2. Midnight to 5, never respond. If it calls 3 times, hum happy birthday. Probably Carter, Ryan said, and even he heard how thin it sounded. Testing. Ethan. The third time, it was longer. The vowels stretched. Ethan. A sing-song that didn't want to be a song, it wanted to be a hand. I opened my mouth and heard my mother's voice say my name the night my dad went to the ER, and I had to drive. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then the rules slammed back in. I swallowed, and the only thing that came out was a mumble of, "Happy birthday to you." The smallest hum, barely air. My throat was dry, the melody juddered. I felt stupid. I kept going. "Happy birthday to." The speakers crackled. Something electronic peeled backward like tape. The syllables under my hum scraped through 3 different pitches at once. Wrong in a way that made my molars ache. It pressed. It listened to my song and leaned. I switched to humming only, no words, and concentrated on the red speckled pattern in the floor tile 2 feet from my shoes. The tiny black flecks that didn't line up if you stared. The adhesive scar where a shelf once stood. 30 heartbeats. 40. The PA gave a soft pop. The store exhaled. The kind of silence that isn't silence but the absence of a predator's footstep. "Okay," Ryan whispered. "Okay, so we both heard that." "Yeah," I said. My chest hurt. I hadn't realized I'd been holding air wrong. "Cool, so we're definitely getting time and a half." He tried the joke again and left it there, dead on the floor between us. Kyle materialized like a leaf blowing in from the next aisle. He was breathing like someone had taught him not to be heard. "You did it right," he said. "Last month a guy named Robert said what on the second call. I didn't see him go, but he doesn't work here anymore." The shape of his voice had the contour of a rumor and the bones of a fact. The TV wall threw a bright wash over us, an ad for sheets with people sleeping like corpses in white rooms. Somewhere down grocery, a freezer cycle kicked on and sounded like someone whispering words too fast to catch. The smell of coffee burned in from the break room ventilation, sour and old. Ryan rubbed his forearms like he could warm off a chill. "We keep each other in sight," he said. "No hero stuff." I nodded. "The rule about heroes is they die." We worked louder than we needed to. Boxes thumped a little harder. Tape ripped a little longer because noise felt like protection. The store didn't care. It watched us with 1,000 dead eyes, security domes, TV screens, a bullseye printed on a display for throw pillows, and waited. The monitor above the counter cycled camera feeds, empty checkout, empty seasonal, empty pet supplies. It clicked back to electronics, and a delayed version of me stared up in grain. I didn't look straight. I looked peripherally. The rule about reflections whispered, and I pretended I was obeying it on purpose. Midnight dragged its feet across the building. The glow felt lower. The seams of the ceiling tiles more prominent. The track lighting resolving into a constellation that didn't match any map. I told myself this was fatigue and caffeine and a subwoofer somewhere. I told myself a lot of things. "Clean up on aisle 7, the PA said. Friendly. Neutral. I saw Ryan's head snap toward grocery before I could even say his name. "It's mine," he said, already moving. "If it's fake, we'll radio. If it's not, we're heroes." Rule 5 said don't go. Ryan went. I followed because when a friend walks toward a dark hole, your legs remember being children and go with him, even if your brain begs no. Grocery terrain changed the smell of your thoughts. Baking mix, stale sugar, cardboard, the metallic freezer tang that feels like a nosebleed thinking about itself. Our sneakers squeaked. Our walkies hissed on our hips with an insect buzz. Aisle 7 stood in obedient rows. Cereal grinning with cartoon mouths, oatmeal that promised heart health, granola in bags that wanted to crackle. There was no spill. There was Kyle. He stood at the far end under a light that flickered, but the flicker never produced dark. He faced away, his arms hung straight, fingers bent just a little too symmetrically. You notice symmetry when it's wrong. Nature likes almosts. This was exact. He didn't sway. He didn't breathe. Until I realized I was listening for it. And heard the tiniest saw. "Kyle?" Ryan said, soft, like waking a sleepwalker. His voice traveled weirdly. Came back too fast, as if the aisle had found a shortcut. No response. We closed the distance with that slow, careful speed you use with injured dogs. Halfway down, the TV wall in electronics bled a little of its light in a pulse, and the cereal mascots looked away. Then back. Kyle turned. He turned all at once, no adjustments, like a hinge was happy to be used. His eyes were black, not night black, lens black, absorb black. If the light had tried to touch them, it would have slid off and gone nowhere. "They're waking up," he said, and his voice had a twin, a second voice laid under the first, a hollow that rang inside you after the sound stopped. His mouth smiled, and then canceled the expression perfectly. Victor appeared like he'd run with care, which is a hard way to run. Carter with him, breathing evenly, eyes already scanning, calculating. "Kyle," Carter said, neutral, leading with the human name. "Come with us." Kyle didn't fight. That might have been the worst part. He let his arms be taken as if gravity had changed its mind and was now only a suggestion. As they passed, the black eyes found me, and for one heartbeat someone lived in there like a fish surfacing. His mouth moved without sound. "Don't let them in." I looked down fast because the reflection rule hummed at the edge of things. On the lower shelf, a cereal box had a glossy patch that caught my face in a tiny warped oval. Around the oval moved a shape, tall, too long, impossible in that inch of shine. I pulled my gaze away so hard my neck clicked, and counted in my head even though the rule said 30 only after seeing something wrong. I counted anyway. 10, 11, 12. "False call," Ryan said into his radio with hands that shook. "Aisle 7, reporting." The PA didn't acknowledge. It made a noise instead, like bubble wrap crushed under water. The temperature dropped a degree. Goose flesh rose on my arms in a line that traced nothing obvious. Somewhere a cart rolled. Slow, squeal, squeal, and stopped. The red cart, I thought. Always the cart. We backed out of the aisle like it had rules we couldn't read. At the cross aisle I looked up, because my mistake had waited patiently for me to make it. The security monitor above the end cap cycled feeds and caught pet supplies. Aisle 13. The camera fisheye made it wrong already. The figure made it worse. Tall, narrow, limbs that looked jointed for a different gravity. It moved in jerks that weren't jerks, like a marionette handled by 10 careful hands. Where the face should have been was a hollow, not hole, not mask, just not face. In the center of the not face a red circle pulsed, not drawn, not light, a target without permission to be there. I did the opposite of what my eyes wanted. I looked at the end cap price strip, at the tiny ink numbers that had bled a little, at the dust line where someone had wiped and missed. I counted to 30, and then 30 again, because panic makes you greedy. When I looked back, the aisle was empty. The cart was gone. The light above aisle 13 buzzed with a sound like a mosquito inside your ear canal. The PA chimed soft and pleasant. "Clean up on aisle 7, it said again, like the first time had been a rehearsal and this was the show. Ryan set his jaw. "Then we're not listening," he said, and I felt the floor tilt as if something had smiled. "Clean up on aisle 7, the PA said again, bright as a smile on a sticker. Ryan was already rolling his cart. "That's mine," he said, trying for casual and missing. The wheels chirped once and kept chirping because my hand was on the handle, stopping him. "It's Rule 5, I said. "We don't check false calls. Then we confirm it's false and radio it. 2 seconds. He tugged, the tendons in his wrists standing up. "Come on." The store felt like it had leaned toward grocery. Air colder. Ceiling lower. We moved anyway, because I wasn't going to let him walk into that voice alone. Smells changed as soon as we crossed the main aisle. Cardboard dust, sugar, the thin metallic bite from freezer seals. The lights hummed with a note you don't notice when there are customers. With the place empty, it was the only thing breathing besides us. Aisle 7 ran straight and obedient. Cereal grinning out of bright boxes. Oatmeal promising heart health. Granola picturing mountains nobody in this zip code had ever seen. No spill, no wet floor sign, no reason to be here. Except Kyle. He stood at the far end beneath a light that hummed a shade too high. Not facing the shelves, not moving merchandise, just standing. His arms hung perfect, left and right mirroring each other too precisely. Nature is almost. He was exact. His head tilted forward as if someone had set him down and forgotten him. "Kyle," Ryan called, low, like waking a sleepwalker. No answer, not even a flinch. I heard footsteps, and then Carter's presence arrived before he did, a pressure in the air. Victor came with him, breath measured, eyes already mapping exits and edges. Carter's voice cut the aisle in half. "Kyle." The fluorescent above us flickered once, almost polite. "Kyle." Sharper. The tube flickered again, in rhythm with the syllable. The building listened. Kyle turned all at once, a hinge glad to be used. No human adjustments, no weight shift. His eyes were lens black. The kind of black that drinks light and gives nothing back. When he smiled, it was a shape, not an emotion. "They're waking up," he said. And the words doubled. A second voice laid under the first, like a shadow that remembered being a body. The hair on my arms rose in a straight line. Victor didn't ask permission. He took Kyle's left arm like you take a mannequin's, firm, respectful, unafraid of breaking it. Carter took the other. Up close, Kyle looked lighter than he should be in the red shirt, like some of him had been scooped out. His heels squeaked once on the tile as they turned him. His head lolled. For a blink, something surfaced in those black discs. Panic, pleading, and his mouth formed 3 soundless words. "Don't let them." Then it was gone. The uniform clung to him as if it had grown there, red cotton tightening like new skin. I tasted iron. Maybe my own mouth. Maybe the air. Ryan's voice landed beside me in a whisper that almost said my name. He caught himself, jaw locking, throat working like he'd swallowed glass. He stared at the speaker in the ceiling as if it might whisper back. Carter and Victor walked Kyle past. The light above them fluttered a third time like it was nodding. Carter didn't look at us. He kept his attention on the not Kyle between them. The way you keep your attention on a live wire while you step over it. The squeak of the shoes faded like a recording. Then silence, except for the hum and the faint, dry crackle of cereal bags settling. I swallowed and it sounded like a cough in the long aisle. "We radio?" I asked, though I knew Carter already had. "False call reported," Victor said into his mic, voice steady, professional, like we were still inside a world where words made rules behave. Static acknowledged him with a single insect hiss, and died. My fingers had sweat bloomed into my gloves. I pressed them flat on the shelf edge to feel something solid. The gloss on a cereal box gave back a funhouse oval of my face. Shallow. Warped. Movement slipped across that shine. Wrong-limbed. Tall. Like someone walked between me and myself. I jerked my gaze away so hard my neck clicked. Counted to 30 in my head out of reflex, even though it wasn't Rule 4's moment. 30 came slow. Beside me, Ryan kept breathing like he had to remember how. "He looked at you," he said. "Kyle, he looked straight at you." "He isn't Kyle," I said. The sentence hurt to say. The clock at the end of the aisle read 2:26 a.m. The second hand climbed molasses slow toward the half hour. I could feel the store tightening behind that number. The way you feel a storm through bone. Somewhere far down seasonal, a cart's front wheel did its small stubborn squeal, and then nothing. Carter reappeared at the mouth of the aisle alone. No Kyle. No explanation. He stopped long enough that I felt myself pinned to the shelf by his gaze. He didn't look disappointed. He looked like a man auditing a load-bearing beam. Victor hovered a step behind him, hands empty, box cutter clipped to his pocket like a confession. "You saw what happens when we test the edges," Carter said, not asking. The lights above him gave a single sympathetic buzz, like a throat clearing. I nodded. I didn't trust my mouth. He looked past me down the glossy rows of cartoon faces and heart-healthy promises, then back. "Stick to the rules," he said, quiet and hard. "Don't test them." Carter's voice came through the radio at 2:29, steady as if reading off a weather report. "Lights out. 15 minutes. Hold position." The air shifted. Not colder, denser, as though the walls pressed in an inch at a time. Every fluorescent hummed higher, straining like they knew what was coming. We gathered in silence at the break between aisles. Deborah crossed herself quickly, whispering, words spilling out too fast to follow until I caught one clear. "Keep my girls safe." Her thumb trembled at her lip. Victor moved closer to me, his presence anchoring. He slipped something small into my palm. A half-empty water bottle, cool from his pocket. His voice was close enough that it didn't need to rise above a whisper. "Just stand still, Ethan. Don't breathe loud. 15 minutes, nothing else, don't give it anything." The second hand climbed. 2:30. The fluorescence screamed once, a hot buzz, then snapped dead. Blackness. Not darkness, the negation of vision. It collapsed over us so sudden I swore my eyelids had been sewn shut. My ears surged with blood, my breath felt too big, too sharp. Somewhere down the line of frozen silence, the first click-click started, like a fluorescent tube about to die. The dry metallic tick of glass thinking about breaking. But the lights were already gone. The sound circled, inching, tasting. Every instinct begged me to crouch, to run, to scratch at the black pressing against my eyeballs. I locked every muscle. I thought of Victor's voice. "Don't give it anything." The click-click passed the candy aisle. It paused. Then moved on, careful like fingertips brushing shelves, closer. The air before me thickened, my nose filled with the sour electric tang of ozone, like burned wiring. It was right there, inches. I didn't see it, I felt it. The absence had shape, height scraping the ceiling, mass folding around me. Breath raked the side of my face, wet, patient, not human lungs, something larger, deeper. As if the store itself was testing me. My eyes watered. The urge to blink became a scream inside my skull. Blinking was moving was answering. Seconds dragged. The click-click beat steady as a metronome, teasing my ears. Then, as if to test me further, it shifted higher. At the crown of my head. 1 beat, 2. Then silence again, vast and drowning. I forced myself into stillness so complete that I wondered if I was still alive. 15 minutes was a lifetime. I counted breaths like prayers, chest tight. Somewhere beside me, Deborah whimpered once, choked it back. I wanted to turn my head toward her, to comfort, to connect. But that was suicide. When the fluorescents came back, they detonated into vision. White light stabbed, my throat seized, eyes tearing. The aisle looked untouched, boxes aligned, shelves perfect. Nothing moved. Except Victor was gone. His water bottle lay crumpled by my feet, my hand still clamped around its ghost shape. On the linoleum, a box cutter gleamed like a dropped tooth. I bent, picked it up. The metal was cold, too cold. My hand shook as I clipped it to my belt. The space where Victor had stood was bare, as though he'd never existed. Deborah stared at the floor, lips moving silently, her prayer gutted into nothing. Ryan wasn't even pretending to be brave anymore. He stared down the aisle with his mouth open, as if waiting for it to speak again. My ears rang, my pulse hammered. Somewhere behind the relit order, I swore I still heard it. the wet breath, the click-click, whispering from just beyond the bulbs. The radio broke the silence. Static tore, then words formed in the hiss. Backroom door open. Carter's head turned. For the first time since I'd met him, fear cracked his face. Not panic, recognition. He holstered the radio like it was useless and strode toward the stockroom. The fluorescents hummed. Steady. Too steady. My knuckles whitened around Victor's cutter. And I followed, because leaving Carter's shadow felt worse than whatever waited through that open door. The radio's hiss still bled in my ears as we crossed toward the back. Backroom door open. That was all it said, but the syllables clung like mold in my throat. Carter walked first, jaw locked. He moved like a man who knew exactly what he would find and dreaded it anyway. His hand hovered at his radio, but didn't touch it again. Deborah shuffled behind, knuckles white around her cross. Ryan stuck close to me now, jitter draining into silence. I gripped Victor's box cutter until it bit my palm. The stockroom door gaped just off the main hall, swung wider than it should have on its hinges. A fog of refrigerated air crawled out, prickling my skin through the red shirt. The smell was off. Not chemicals, not meat. A cold metallic sweetness, like pennies washed in bleach. Carter froze before the threshold. Rule 7, he said flat, not looking at any of us. Don't open the back room once it's closed. Ryan huffed a whisper laugh that didn't land. It's already open. He took half a step. I grabbed his sleeve. Don't. We wait for Carter. He shook me off, eyes fixed on the slow swing of the door. If someone's in there... Ryan. He went anyway. The temperature dropped hard as soon as he crossed. I followed to the frame, but not past it. My skin prickled with the rawness inside. The back room didn't look like caged pallets and shrink-wrap towers anymore. The geometry was wrong. Rows of freight had been pulled and stacked in deliberate arcs, curving inward, spiraling higher, until they formed a single vast bullseye. The cardboard was stained wet, circles bleeding from brown into a deeper red. In the dim fluorescence overhead, the rings seemed to pulse like a pupil dilating. Around it stood figures. Employees, but not. Shirts too bright, too red. Sleeves stretched into skin. Their spines bent backward slightly like puppets waiting for strings. Black lens eyes turned in unison toward Ryan as he stopped at the edge of the spiral. He whispered my name without looking back. Ethan? The chorus answered him. Dozens of mouths opening in perfect sync, whispering with one voice pitched a second too low. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. Ryan's body jerked like he'd been pushed from behind. He fell forward onto his knees. The figures shifted, not stepping, just gliding, until they pressed close around him. Their hands sank into his shirt. The cotton darkened instantly, threads absorbing into their own. His red blended with theirs. Bleeding out, seamless. Ryan, I shouted before I remembered shouting was the worst thing I could do. My voice fell flat, swallowed by the bullseye's silence. He twisted his head once. For a blink, his face was Ryan's, scared, pleading. His mouth opened on a warning. Don't. Then the spiral pulsed, and his words became a scream that wasn't his. The sound bent around the stacks, echoing wrong, until it hit me like a vibration through the teeth. I stumbled back from the frame. Deborah sobbed into her hand. Carter didn't move. His face was granite, but his knuckles had gone pale on the radio clip at his belt. When I looked again, Ryan was gone. No trace, just the bullseye breathing. Cardboard groaning under invisible weight. The employee things turned their black eyes back toward me, all together, like a flock turning wing. The intercom crackled above, dead for hours until now. Static bled into a voice. Ryan's voice. Ethan, Ethan, help me. I backed into the hall wall, breath clawing my throat. The overhead light flickered once, and in its ghost shadow I thought I saw him. Not in the circle, not anywhere, but standing behind the glass of the freezer door 20 feet away. His smile too wide, his hand raised in a mock wave. Office, now. Maya's hand clamped my arm from nowhere, yanking me away from the frame. She hadn't been with us? I didn't even know she was still alive, but her nails dug so deep it hurt. "Office," she hissed again and dragged me toward the side hall before the chorus could finish saying my name. Behind us, the intercom played his voice a third time, long and low, so broken it hardly sounded human. The office door slammed behind us, the lock clicking twice under Carter's hand. The five of us, me, Carter, Maya, Deborah, Arturo, pressed into the cramped square of beige walls and humming monitors. The air was recycled, stale with burnt coffee and disinfectant, but it felt safer than the endless aisles outside. For a second, the cameras lined the wall above the desk, each screen split into quarters. I'd seen them earlier, just sterile views of carts, aisles, and shelves. Now the images warped. The store had stretched. Aisles didn't end. They ran like hallways in a funhouse mirror, shelves climbing higher than the ceiling itself. Mannequins in clothing displays tilted their heads a fraction at a time, their fiberglass chests lifting in subtle imitation of breath. No one spoke. Arturo swore under his breath, muttering about cheap cameras, but his voice cracked halfway. Maya sank into the office chair, hugging herself, eyes on the floor. Deborah stared at the monitors, knuckles digging into her lips. Her breath hitched. "That's..." She pointed at the upper right feed. The audio crackle from the intercom filled the room, low and grinding. A voice coiled through the static. "Deborah." Her name dragged across the speakers like a nail. She froze. Carter's hand rose instantly, palm out. "Don't." Not a word. The voice came again, softer, coaxing. "Deborah, come on, Deb, please." It wasn't just her name anymore. It was layered, her daughter's voice high and small buried under the static. I'd heard Deborah whispering prayers about her earlier. I recognized the tremor in her hands. Her eyes welled. She needs me." "Deborah," Carter's tone cracked sharp as glass. "That's not her. That's Rule 2. You know this." But the speakers hissed, carrying the sound of a child crying, not recorded. Alive. Desperate. The sound filled the office until it rattled the metal filing cabinets. Deborah pressed her palms over her ears. Then she screamed, words splitting through the sob. "I can't leave her." The moment her voice hit the air, the lights in the office flickered red. The screens bled, cameras filling with the bullseye logo stretched across every aisle, pulsing like a heart. Deborah staggered, dropping her hands. Her eyes were still hers for a beat, glassy with tears. "I don't." Then the black spread, from pupil to sclera, swallowing, lens dark. She sobbed once, loud, and grabbed the claw hammer from the desk. "Deborah," Carter barked, but she was already swinging. The hammer cracked into drywall an inch from Arturo's head. He stumbled back, shouting. She turned on him, tears spilling, eyes void. "I don't want to hurt you," she sobbed, voice doubled, hers and something deeper riding under it. Maya shrieked, trying to hold her arms. Deborah bucked, strength unnatural, swinging again, catching Maya across the shoulder. Carter lunged, locking her arms from behind. The hammer clattered. She thrashed and screamed, the dual voices grinding against each other, until Carter forced her down against the desk. "Deborah, stop!" I yelled, but it wasn't her anymore. Her final cry tore through the room. "Please forgive me." Then she went limp, eyes still black, chest shuddering until the breath rattled out. Silence hit. Heavy. None of us moved. The monitors showed aisles still stretching, mannequins rising and falling like lungs. Outside the door, the first bang landed. Then another. Then another. Dozens. Hundreds. The office door rattled on its hinges under the pressure of unseen hands. Arturo backed to the far corner, face pale. "We're not getting out." The wood split with each strike. Maya clutched her shoulder, bleeding, eyes wide. Carter stood over Deborah's still body, not looking at us, breathing ragged. His lips moved but no sound came, like he was reciting a rule too late. The pounding grew louder, the rhythm too precise. Too many hands working together. I knew what it was. Not a mob, not people. The store itself was knocking, and it wanted in. The pounding didn't stop. It never staggered, never tired. Hundreds of palms in lockstep, beating the office door like a drum for something bigger than sound. Each impact sent a fine spray of dust drifting from the frame, gray clouds curling in the air between us. Carter tore his gaze from Deborah's body. His voice came low, clipped like he was forcing words past a throat too dry to cooperate. "There's a service tunnel. Garden center. It's not on the map. We move. Now." Maya pressed a sleeve to her bleeding shoulder, trembling. "That thing outside will just follow." "It already knows where we are?" Carter snapped. "Not cruel. Just fact." He yanked a key ring from his belt and shoved past the desk. Arturo hovered at the door, jaw slack, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped his radio. When Carter unlocked the secondary door at the back of the office, a chill draft slid in. The hall beyond wasn't lit, just a stretch of cinder block painted a beige that looked gray in the dark. We filed into it one by one, the fluorescent hum receding as the pounding continued behind us. The deeper we went, the more wrong the space became. The air thickened, damp and metallic, as if we were walking deeper into the store's lungs. Water streaked the walls in thin black rivulets, trickling downward in lines that weren't random. They bled into letters. "Follow Ryan." The words slid as I read them, like they were being rewritten under my eyes. Arturo swore and pressed his hand over them, only to snatch it back when the black smeared up his skin. "No stopping," Carter barked, voice tight, eyes forward. But the ceiling betrayed us, a scrape overhead. Then a wet shuffle, like something dragging itself belly first above the tiles. My throat went dry. Maya's flashlight trembled as she tilted it upward. The beam caught motion. A smear of black limbs, dozens of them, crawling sideways across the pipes. The shapes didn't obey gravity. They clung, dripping tar-like residue that hissed when it hit the concrete floor. "Don't look," Carter hissed. "Keep moving." We did, faster now, boots splashing in the growing slick. The tunnel widened, then ended in a corrugated gate. The garden center. Carter shoved his key into the padlock, muscles tight, jaw grinding. Almost. Then the intercom crackled overhead. But we weren't in the store anymore. No speakers hung in this tunnel. The voice bled straight from the cinder block itself. "Ethan." I flinched. The voice was Ryan's. Perfectly Ryan's. I forced myself to breathe slow, fists white-knuckled. The lock snapped open. We pushed through into the garden center. The space should have been racks of patio furniture and plastic ferns. Instead, wire fencing stretched across the far side, sealing us in like cattle. Beyond the fence stood Ryan, or what wore Ryan. His red polo was too bright, too saturated, his smile carved too wide. His hands pressed against the mesh, and where his fingers touched, black seeped through the metal. He wasn't alone. Marcus, the older stalker I'd only glimpsed once, always quiet, stood beside him. Half his face sagged into shadow, the other staring blankly. Arturo broke. No, we're not staying in here." He bolted past Carter, slamming into the fence. The metal rang. Ryan's doppelganger leaned closer. "Arturo," it said softly. Arturo clawed at the mesh, desperate. Black fingers reached through from the other side, too many to belong to one body. They lanced into him like hooks. He screamed, but not long. His form collapsed inward. Skin flattening, sucked between the wires. A smear of red spread across the fence, then was gone. Absorbed into the black behind it. Maya shrieked. Carter grabbed her arm, yanking her back. "Barricade! Now!" We dragged planters, shelving, anything we could lift against the gate. My lungs burned. The mesh still thrummed under unseen pressure, but at least it held for now. Ryan's copy pressed his forehead to the metal. Eyes lens black. Smile stretching. He whispered without sound, but I read the words in the movement of his lips. "You're late." Carter shoved something into my hands. The cold steel startled me. It was the store's emergency shotgun, battered but real. His eyes locked on mine, unblinking. "Sunrise resets the terms," he said, and the pounding began again, this time from the other side of the fence. The barricade shuddered every few seconds, metal groaning under a pressure we couldn't see. Planters rattled, shelves creaked, dust trickled down like falling ash. But for the moment, the fence held. We huddled in the garden center. cold air leaking through unseen seams. The space smelled of fertilizer and wet plastic, but underneath it, something rank, like wet pennies pressed into a wound. Beyond the mesh, the things waited. Ryan's twin leaned against the fence casually, grin cutting too wide. Marcus stood beside him, head lolling, eyes nothing but slick black, and behind them, more shadows pressed. Red polos too bright in the dark, like meat still wet with blood. Their voices rose, not loud, but layered. Ethan, Deborah, Marcia. Names, always trying to pull. Maya folded in on herself, knees tucked, shaking hard enough that her teeth clicked. They sound just like them. Her whisper was a confession. I gripped the shotgun tighter. The steel felt heavier than my arms could justify, as if the rules themselves had been poured into the barrel. The fence rattled again. Ryan's copy leaned closer. His lips moved slowly. One rule. I tore my eyes away, forcing them to Carter. His face looked carved from stone, but the cracks were there, sweat shining his forehead, his lower lip trembling against clenched teeth. "Carter," I said, "there's something you're not telling us." His silence said enough. Then Maya's whisper sliced the air. "You knew from the start." Carter closed his eyes for a moment, shoulders sagging. When he opened them, the hardness was gone. Only exhaustion remained. 7 rules keep the store fed. But there's one more. One we don't print. One you only hear if you make it this far. Maya shook her head, almost laughing, hysteria bubbling. "You hit a rule? Now?" His voice didn't rise, it sank. "If you've never broken one, they can't touch you." The air thickened. The chorus outside hissed and fell into sudden silence, like the admission satisfied them. I swallowed hard. "Never broken one?" Carter's eyes flicked to Maya first. "You answered. That voice that called you week 1. You said what? That was enough." Her face crumpled. Then he looked at me. His stare lingered, heavy, as though weighing something. Finally, he turned his gaze back to the fence. He didn't need to explain. I'd never answered. I'd sung instead. I'd looked away when the monitors pulled. I'd obeyed. Clean. The weight of it hit me like ice. Not pride. Guilt. Victor's cutter hitting the floor. Deborah's scream. Arturo's collapse. Kyle's hollow eyes. All of them gone. I was still standing. Maya clutched her shoulder, whispering, "So he's the only one they want." "No." Carter's jaw tightened. "He's the only one who can walk through." The pounding resumed, rattling the barricade so hard the planters hopped. Carter's hand landed on my shoulder, firm. "Sunrise resets the terms. You walk. You keep your head. Don't answer. Don't look. Don't stop." Maya grabbed my other hand, pressing something into my palm. Her badge, a little rectangle of laminated plastic, her name fading at the corners. "If you make it, tell someone. Tell the world. This place, these rules, they're real." Her hand shook as she let go. The chorus outside erupted again. Voices all at once, not random now, not many. One. They spoke together, perfectly timed, perfectly unified. "One rule, Ethan. Just one." The fence bent inward, metal whining. The bullseye logo painted on the garden center wall pulsed once, twice, like a heart. I clutched the shotgun, Maya's badge digging into my skin. The world narrowed to Carter's stare, unflinching. "You walk alone," he said. The barricade snapped, the voices screamed. And I knew this was the last night the rules would save me. The barricade didn't collapse all at once. It bent, bowed, then split like wet cardboard. A single shriek of torn steel echoed through the garden center, and the air went hollow. Carter shoved me toward the main aisles. "Go, now." His voice was steady, but his hand trembled against my shoulder. I clutched the shotgun, Maya's badge biting into my palm. One rectangle of laminate, name already fading, as if the store itself had started erasing her. The chorus outside surged in, but it wasn't a chorus anymore. It was one voice, infinite mouths. "Walk." I stepped forward. The target was no longer a store. Aisles stretched cathedral tall, overhead lights dangling like stars pulled too close. Red bullseyes bloomed on every surface, cereal boxes, freezer doors, linoleum tiles, each one pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat. Somewhere, Ryan walked beside me. Not his body, the entity, but his voice. "Easy. joking. The same as always. Remember? Sushi in the Target cafe? You and me. No one else ever touched it, just us. My breath hitched. I remembered. The tray's plastic, the rice stale, the laugh we shared because it was pathetic. A stupid little joke only we had. Now it came from the dark. I tightened my grip on the shotgun. You're not him. But the voice smiled inside my ear. Ethan, no one else even knows that. No one else was there. The freezer section loomed to my right, the glass fogged, shapes moving within. For a moment I saw us, me and Ryan, living, laughing, stupid hats tilted back as we choked down cafeteria sushi. I almost stopped. The glass blinked. Not condensation, not reflection. The bullseye had eyes now. I wrenched my gaze away and kept walking. My boots clanged against the tile, echoing too loud, like footsteps on metal instead of floor. Behind me, Carter shouted something I couldn't make out. Then a gunshot cracked, echoing sharp and cut off. I didn't turn. The aisles warped, stretching wider, then narrowing to squeeze my shoulders. Shelves breathed, cereal boxes sighing dust, mannequins leaned from apparel, mouths stretched too wide, whispering my name. Ethan, Ethan, Ethan. The badge in my hand felt like fire. I pressed it against my chest, plastic edge cutting skin, reminding me, Maya is real, I'm real. The lights flickered. For a second, I wasn't in Target, I was standing inside a pupil, black stretching infinite. White walls curved like sclera. Red rings tightening into focus. The bullseye blinked, my knees buckled. I nearly dropped the shotgun. Ryan's voice came soft, pleading, don't leave me here. Just say my name once. I forced one boot forward, then the other, not answering, not looking, not stopping. I passed freezer 13. The glass flickered again, not sushi this time. Not Ryan. Me, my own reflection. Standing perfectly still, eyes black lenses. It smiled as I staggered past. The floor pulsed underfoot, red spreading through tile like veins. The bullseye above me dilated, iris opening, eyelid creaking. One massive eye stared down. The automatic doors shimmered ahead, glass trembling with morning light. The voice behind me broke. Ethan, please don't leave me. I almost answered. Almost. Instead, I shut my eyes. I walked. My boots slapped tile, heartbeat counting steps, 30, 40, 50, until the hum of the doors reached me. Ding. I opened my eyes. The doors slid apart, sunlight spilling through. Behind me, the store screamed. The first breath of air outside hit like ice water. Not clean, not fresh, just different. After hours of recycled conditioning, it cut through me sharp enough to make my knees buckle. I staggered onto the asphalt, shotgun dragging at my side. The parking lot stretched empty, LED lamps still buzzing overhead, their halos pale against the dawn trying to break behind them. The doors hissed closed at my back. The sound was final, like a lid sealing. I waited for the scream to follow. It did. It came as a single note so high it shook the glass. Not a mob, not the chorus, just the store itself, furious to be denied. But it couldn't cross the threshold. The screen broke, dissolved into static. When I turned, Target looked ordinary. Too ordinary. The aisles visible through the glass were neat, fluorescent white, end caps straightened with precision, Sunday clean. A man in a red polo pushed carts across the entryway, humming. Another unlocked a register, yawning. The ordinary rhythm of opening shift. Except, in the reflection, they didn't move quite right. Their heads turned a second late, their mouths opened without sound. And behind the glass, where light warped, Ryan stood. Not all at once. At first just a smudge in the glare, then an outline. His smile too wide, his shirt too red. He lifted a hand. For a moment I thought he'd wave. Instead, he pressed his palm against the glass. The bullseye bloomed there, swelling under his skin. Red rings pulsing outward. His eye locked on mine. I stepped back, shotgun heavy in my arms. The sunrise crept higher, warming the asphalt. Shadows stretched long, reaching toward the store, but never touching me. The rules were holding. For now, but I couldn't shake the truth. They hadn't gone. They never left. The badge burned in my pocket. Maya's last tether. The laminate edged me of what it cost to walk out alive. Ryan's reflection tilted his head, smile widening. His lips shaped a word I couldn't hear, but I knew. My name. I turned the key. Engine coughing awake. The glass front of Target blurred behind exhaust. Customers began drifting in. Early risers with carts squeaking, unaware of what waited between the shelves. They didn't see Ryan watching. They didn't hear the faint static still bleeding through the intercom. They didn't know the rules. I gripped the wheel, breath ragged, and forced the car forward. The sun climbed. My rear view caught one last glimpse of the bullseye on the store's facade. It blinked, and then the light swallowed it. I whispered the only prayer left. The rules are the only thing between us and the eye. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to Dr. Noctis for more horror stories.